You're standing at the edge of something. Maybe it's your faith, your job, your dream, or a relationship you've given everything to. You've tried, prayed, cried, and waited, but nothing seems to move. Every door you've knocked on has stayed closed. Every prayer you've whispered seems to dissolve into silence. And now you're here, at the breaking point, ready to quit. But what if this moment, the one that feels like your ending, isn't the end at all? What if it's the hidden doorway to what you've been praying for all along? Because here's what most people don't realize. God does some of His greatest work in the moments that look like failure. The delay isn't denial, it's divine design. You think you're standing still, but in the unseen, He's shifting everything. The problem is, you can't see it yet. Not because it's not happening, but because He's teaching you to trust Him when you can't trace Him. This is the place where most people walk away before the breakthrough. The tension you feel right now isn't a sign that God has left. It's proof that He's preparing. Something is forming beneath the silence. And if you can just hold on a little longer, what's been hidden will start to surface. Because the truth is, you're not waiting for God to move. He's waiting for you to not quit before He does. It's usually not the loud moments that define you, it's the quiet ones. The ones no one sees. The nights when the weight of waiting presses against your chest so heavily that you start to forget what it felt like to breathe freely. The kind of waiting that doesn't just test your patience, it tests your identity. You start to question if you even heard God right in the first place. You start to wonder if maybe you misread the signs. If maybe this was all just you chasing something that was never meant to be. And yet, somewhere deep inside, a small, stubborn spark refuses to go out. You tell yourself you'll give it one more day, one more prayer, one more step. But even that one step feels heavier than it should. You're caught between two voices, the one that whispers, "It's over," and the other that quietly says, "Hold on, I'm not finished yet." There's a story one most people never hear about of a man who almost gave up the day before his life changed. He wasn't famous. He wasn't strong. He was just tired. He had prayed for years for something that never seemed to come. The more he prayed, the worse things got. Until one morning, before sunrise, he walked to the edge of a small field, fell to his knees, and said the words that we all say when our faith starts to break. "God, if you're still there, give me a sign, because I can't do this anymore." And that's when it happened, not in thunder or fire, but in stillness. A wind brushed past him, warm and gentle, and for the first time in months, his heart went quiet. He didn't hear a voice, but he felt one. It was as if God wasn't answering him with words, but with presence. In that moment, he realized something he hadn't been waiting for God. God had been waiting with him. That's the paradox of divine waiting. You think God is late because you measure progress by what you can see. But heaven measures it by what's growing underneath the surface. The seed always dies before it sprouts. And maybe that's what's happening to you, not a burial, but a planting, you see. When you ask God for strength, He doesn't hand it to you wrapped in comfort. He gives you struggle. Because strength isn't built in answered prayers. It's built in unanswered ones. Every delay is a divine classroom where faith learns to stand without sight. Every "not yet" from God is actually an "I'm preparing you." But the enemy knows something about waiting too. He knows most people don't quit because they're weak. They quit because they're weary. That's why the pressure intensifies right before breakthrough. Because the closer you get to what God promised, the louder the noise gets. That's what was happening to that man in the field. What he didn't know was that, while he was praying on his knees, the answer he'd been waiting for was already moving toward him. A letter had been mailed the day before that would change his life forever. But if he had quit one day earlier, he would have never seen it. That's how close you are right now. What if the silence you're feeling isn't God's absence, but His stillness, because He's working in a realm that your eyes can't yet reach? What if the waiting isn't proof that He's forgotten, but evidence that the story isn't finished? You might think you're standing still, but heaven is in motion. You're not behind schedule, you're right on time. The truth is, God rarely shows up early, but He's never late. Every moment that feels wasted is a page being written in a story that will only make sense when you see the full picture. You don't have to understand the process to trust the promise. You just have to stay long enough to see it unfold, because the moment you feel like giving up is often the moment just before the shift. The atmosphere changes, the pressure peaks, the weight becomes unbearable, and that's when something breaks, not you, but the wall between what is and what's about to be. This is what waiting really is, not idleness, not punishment, but transformation. You're not stuck, you're being stretched. The delay is not God denying your future. It's Him designing your character. And when He's done, you'll realize that what He was building in you was always greater than what you were asking from Him. Don't mistake the silence for distance. Don't confuse the stillness for absence. The very fact that you're still standing is proof that He's still working. You may not see it yet, but you will. You may not feel it now, but you're closer than you think. So before you quit, pause, breathe, look around. You're not waiting for God to catch up. He's been waiting for you to stay long enough to witness what He's already set in motion. And when it happens, and it will, you'll realize that the very season you prayed to escape was the one that prepared you for everything that comes next. Because the waiting isn't where faith dies. It's where faith learns to live. Waiting can feel like a slow suffocation, the kind that doesn't choke you all at once, but instead steals your breath one day at a time. You start out hopeful. You tell yourself, God is in control. You recite the verses, whisper the prayers, force the smile. But then weeks turn into months, and months turn into years, and the silence starts to sound louder than the promise. You begin to wonder if maybe you misunderstood God entirely. This is the tension between faith and sight, the invisible battlefield that every believer eventually walks through. It's not about the dream itself. It's about who you're becoming while you wait for it. Waiting exposes what's inside you. It reveals whether your hope was rooted in the outcome or in the one who promised it. There's a hidden truth that most people never learn. God uses the delay to detox your heart from dependency. Because if He gave you what you wanted the moment you asked, you'd mistake the gift for the source. So, He waits not because He's cruel, but because He's kind enough to build capacity inside you. Think about it. Joseph had a dream of leadership, but spent years in prison before wearing the crown. David was anointed king as a boy, but returned to tend sheep in obscurity. Even Jesus spent 30 hidden years in preparation for 3 years of ministry. Heaven doesn't rush. because time is the tool that perfects trust. The man from the field, the one who almost quit, didn't know it yet, but his story was only beginning. That morning, after he surrendered, he returned home empty-handed, but strangely peaceful. Something subtle had shifted. His circumstances hadn't changed, but his perspective had. For the first time, he stopped asking when and started asking why. And that question began to open something inside of him, a quiet awareness that maybe God wasn't testing his endurance, but his intimacy. The next few days were uneventful, at least on the surface. But beneath the monotony, something was stirring. The letter that had been sent days earlier was already traveling toward his mailbox. It carried an invitation that would change the direction of his life. But even then, God didn't rush. The timing had to be perfect, not just in logistics, but in alignment. Because divine timing is never about convenience. It's about readiness. That's the part of waiting no one talks about, the fact that God's preparation always feels like delay. You think He's holding you back, when, in truth, He's holding things together. Every not yet from God is not a closed door, it's an unopened one. There's a difference. Closed doors are permanent. Unopened doors are patient. They're waiting for the exact moment when stepping through them won't destroy you, but define you. So while you're pacing and questioning, heaven is arranging and aligning. While you're losing sleep, wondering if He's forgotten you, He's writing details you can't yet comprehend. You're not stuck, you're in sequence. Every delay is a divine synchronization between your preparation and His purpose. And maybe that's why you feel restless, because your spirit senses movement that your eyes can't yet see. But waiting isn't passive. It's not just sitting in despair, hoping something changes. True waiting is active trust. It's showing up every day with faith that refuses to fold, even when nothing makes sense. It's waking up before dawn, like that man in the field, and saying, God, I'll keep walking, even if I can't see where this path leads. That's what faith looks like when it matures. It stops bargaining with outcomes and starts bonding with obedience. It's not about getting what you prayed for, it's about becoming who you were meant to be while you wait for it. And just when you begin to think the story is over, something begins to shift quietly behind the scenes. The man's mail arrives. He doesn't notice it at first, just another envelope among bills and advertisements. But when he opens it, his breath catches. It's an offer for a job, one he never applied for. Someone had recommended him from years ago, long after he'd forgotten the connection. It didn't make sense. But then again, divine timing rarely does, you see. The miracle was never the letter, it was the endurance that kept him alive long enough to receive it. Because that's how God works. He doesn't just answer your prayers. He preserves you until the answer arrives. And maybe that's the point. Waiting isn't a punishment. It's proof that heaven trusts you with process. If you were unworthy of the promise, He wouldn't make you wait for it. So before you quit, pause and remember this. The silence doesn't mean nothing is happening. It means everything is happening, just not in front of you. The man didn't know that his prayer in the field had already set heaven in motion. You might not know it either, but something has already been sent in your direction. The delay is only the distance between now and its arrival. Keep walking. Keep believing, because what's coming next will not just answer your prayer, will prove that God was in the waiting all along. There's a sacred rhythm in how God moves in order hidden beneath the silence. A divine choreography you can only see when you stop trying to control it. The world tells you that waiting is wasted time, that stillness means you're falling behind. But heaven operates by a different clock. God doesn't rush because he's never late. His timing isn't measured in minutes or months, it's measured in maturity. And that's why the season you're in right now is so crucial. Because before God shifts your circumstances, he refines your heart. For the man in the field, the letter wasn't just an answer, it was a mirror. It reflected how much he had changed. Months earlier, he would have grabbed it with trembling hands, desperate for rescue. But now, when he held it, he felt gratitude, not relief. He realized something profound. The real miracle wasn't that God came through. It was that he didn't quit before he did. That's the moment when faith becomes something deeper than belief, becomes trust. Trust isn't built in answered prayers. It's built in the nights you prayed and nothing happened, yet you stayed anyway. It's in the mornings you wanted to give up, but decided to get up instead. Trust is born in the darkness between promise and fulfillment. When you choose to believe that silence still speaks. But here's the secret no one tells you. Sometimes God lets everything fall apart so he can rebuild it the right way. Waiting exposes the cracks that comfort once covered. It forces you to confront what you've been depending on, your plans, your logic, your control. And in stripping those things away, he's not being cruel. He's clearing space for something stronger to grow. The man in the story soon discovered that the job offer wasn't the destination, it was the doorway. Through it, he met people who would eventually lead him into his true calling. What began as a small act of obedience rippled into something he could have never predicted. But that's how God works. He gives you pieces, not the picture. Because if you saw the whole thing, you'd stop walking by faith. So instead, he hands you fragments, moments that don't make sense on their own. The unanswered prayer, the delay, the sudden change, the heartbreak. Each one feels random until one day they align perfectly and you realize none of it was wasted. Every disappointment was direction. Every closed door was protection. Every season of silence was preparation. It's only in hindsight that you see it clearly, the fingerprints of God pressed into the places you thought he had forgotten. That kind of perspective doesn't come cheap. It costs surrender. Real surrender isn't throwing up your hands and giving up, it's opening your hands and letting go. It's saying, God, even if you never give me what I asked for, I'll still trust you. That's the kind of faith that shakes the unseen. Because heaven doesn't respond to desperation. It responds to trust. There's a story in the Bible about the prophet Elijah. After a great victory, he found himself alone, hiding in a cave, convinced that God had abandoned him. He wanted to quit. But then came a whisper, a sound so gentle it almost went unnoticed. And that's where God was, not in the earthquake, not in the fire, but in the still, small voice. That's how he still speaks today. Not always through miracles or signs, but through whispers that only quiet hearts can hear. And the longer you wait, the more clearly you begin to recognize that voice. You realize it's not just guiding you, it's guarding you. Because the waiting room of God is also the training ground of discernment. That's what the man learned. The longer he waited, the sharper his spirit became. He began to notice divine patterns, small coincidences that weren't coincidences at all. He'd bump into someone at the exact moment he needed a word of encouragement. He'd miss an opportunity, only to later discover it wasn't meant for him. Every detour had purpose. Every delay had precision. You see, God doesn't just work for you, He works through you. The waiting isn't just about what's coming. It's about who you're becoming in the process. And the moment you stop fighting the silence, you begin to hear the rhythm underneath it, the steady heartbeat of heaven reminding you, I'm still here. And that's when it happens, the shift. It's not loud or dramatic. It's quiet, subtle, almost imperceptible. But suddenly, you notice peace where there used to be panic, clarity where there used to be confusion, faith where there used to be fear. You realize that the waiting didn't just prepare you for the blessing, the waiting was the blessing. The man didn't see it at first, but every delay had aligned him with destiny. The letter, the new job, the people he met, all of it converged to lead him somewhere deeper, somewhere sacred. And one evening, as he walked home under a burning sunset, he whispered a prayer, not asking for anything, not demanding a sign, but simply saying, "Thank you for not letting me quit." Because he finally understood God's silence wasn't His absence. It was His presence disguised as patience. And just when it seemed like the story had reached its resolution, heaven whispered again in open loop, a new direction. Because with God, the end of one waiting season is always the beginning of another revelation. Something was coming next, something bigger than the man could imagine. The silence had done its work. The soil was ready, and the first sign of the new season was about to appear. There comes a point when you realize that waiting was never about endurance, it was about transformation. You thought God was making you wait so He could change your situation, but all along, He was using the situation to change you. Waiting strips away illusions. It takes your plans, your timing, your certainty, and leaves you with one thing: dependence. Not the kind that feels desperate, but the kind that feels anchored. You no longer need to see what's next to trust that something is next. You stop chasing outcomes and start resting in orchestration. That's where the man from the field found himself. Months had passed since the letter arrived, and what began as a simple job offer had turned into a season of new purpose. He wasn't striving anymore. The noise inside him had quieted. He had learned how to walk with peace, even when answers hadn't fully come. But then another silence. This one felt different, deeper. It wasn't the silence of absence. It was the silence before revelation. Something was shifting again, but this time he wasn't afraid. He had seen too much to doubt, so he waited, not with clenched fists, but with open hands. And then, one morning, as the light spilled through his window, he felt it, a familiar stirring. That same quiet presence from the field months before. Only this time, there were no questions, no pleas, just a deep awareness that something holy was unfolding. Later that day, he received a call, an unexpected invitation to share his story with a group of people who were struggling, waiting, breaking, just as he once had. He hesitated at first, unsure if his simple story was worth telling, but he said yes. And that's how God works. When you stop demanding purpose, He gives you one. Standing before the small crowd, he didn't speak with confidence. He spoke with honesty. He told them about the night he almost gave up, the prayer he whispered, the silence that followed, and the peace that came after. As he spoke, he noticed faces, softening tears, smiles, silent nods of understanding. When he finished, someone came forward and said, "I was going to quit tonight, but not anymore." And in that moment, he realized why God made him wait so long. The waiting wasn't just about him. It was about everyone who would find hope through his story. That's the secret hidden inside every divine delay. Your waiting isn't wasted because your story isn't just yours. The same silence that breaks you becomes the sound that heals someone else. You see, God never wastes pain. He repurposes it. Every unanswered prayer, every season of waiting, every night spent wondering if he even hears you, it's all being woven into a greater tapestry. One that only makes sense when you look back. The man who once fell to his knees begging for a sign was now standing as one. His life had become evidence that God works while you wait, not always visibly, but always intentionally. And maybe that's the point of it all, not to get what you want from God, but to become what He's been shaping all along. Because sometimes the greatest miracle isn't the breakthrough you receive, it's the faith you gain while waiting for it. The waiting ends, not when the answer comes, but when peace replaces urgency. When you stop asking when and start saying thank you. When the silence stops feeling like distance and starts feeling like presence. That's when you know the waiting season has done its work. But make no mistake, this isn't the end. God's story never ends in stillness. It always ends in motion. Because every ending in faith is a beginning in disguise. The man from the field didn't return to his old life. He walked into a new one, marked not by striving, but by surrender. And as he stood one last time in that same quiet field, now green, alive, and golden with morning light, he whispered the same words he once spoke in desperation. But this time with reverence and peace. God, I trust you, even when I can't see it. I know you're working. The wind moved softly through the grass, like an invisible hand brushing against his soul. And in that sacred silence, he finally understood waiting was never about withholding. It was about weaving. God hadn't been delaying. He'd been designing, and now the masterpiece was complete. He smiled, closed his eyes, and for the first time in a long time, felt something deeper than joy, contentment. The kind that comes from knowing that no moment was wasted, that the waiting had purpose, that the silence had meaning, and that the same God who seemed distant in the darkness was, all along, walking beside him in the light. Because when you refuse to quit, when you stay in the waiting, when you trust the silence, you don't just see God's promise fulfilled. You become the proof that He was faithful all along.